Preventable medical errors are now the third leading cause of death in the United States, somewhere between 220,000 and 440,000 deaths per year in the United States.
The concern about medical error is the lack of realization by the public at large. It really amounts to the equivalent of a 9/11 catastrophic loss every week of the year.
How did we ever get here? How did we ever get to a point where medical error is the third leading cause of death in the United States? Where people are dying not from the disease or illness that brings them to care, but from the actual care that they receive.
And the third leading cause of death in this country has to do with preventable medical errors in hospitals. A recent article published in the Journal of Patient Safety estimates that as many as 440,000 people a year may die from preventable medical errors in hospitals.
There are events that they call never events that should never happen. You should never operate on the wrong part of the body. You should never do the right operation on the wrong person. You should never have a medication error. You should never lose someone who's having an elective procedure. These are just events that never should happen, and unfortunately, they still do.
My name's Angela. I'm a social worker and filmmaker from Glendale, California, and I used to sing this nursery song many times growing up, which is attributed to my blind trust in doctors. Growing up, I never really thought to question doctors or think that they may have an ulterior motive or may even be a criminal. Not until a couple years ago, when I reconnected with my childhood friend Ojen, and she shared with me about how she went in for a simple ovarian cyst removal that turned her entire life upside down.
So tell me what happened. In March 2016, I went in for an ovarian cyst removal. At some point during the surgery, something went wrong. Nobody knows what exactly, because there's been multiple versions of what the surgeon thinks happened. But basically and ultimately, my aorta was punctured 3 times, all the way through to my IVC and small intestine. I started to flatline. I was losing a lot of blood. I was in an induced coma for 5 days. Basically, complications started to happen from all the blood transfusion. I had lost so much blood. They had to put 20 pints of blood back in. When they did that, the next day, I got a blood clot in my leg. They were monitoring it. They removed that, and they also repaired my artery. I just remember waking up and wondering what has been done to my body. I know that I was asking if I'm going to be able to have children anymore, because I didn't know what had been done to my body for 5 days. That's the scariest feeling on the planet. You don't know for 5 days what people have done to your body.
Just hang in there. Don't worry about having kids. You will have kids.
I guess.
And I was woken up at 2 a.m. by the doctor, my vascular surgeon, who woke me up and said, "We need to take you in for surgery. You have something called compartment syndrome. Your foot is essentially dying. We don't know if we're going to be able to save your leg." What? I came in for an ovarian cyst removal. You can't take my leg. That's not an option. The hardest thing for a parent, I've been a single parent, raised her 28 years. In 28 minutes, she just took our lives away. When they took me in for that surgery, it's called a fasciotomy. Basically, he's cutting very deep, almost to the bone, to release the pressure and allow that swelling to go down. It was so severe that they had to keep both of my wounds open for a week after surgery. I wouldn't say the surgery was a success. It was a success in that amputation was avoided, but the compromise was that The fasciotomy paralyzed my leg. I had something called foot drop, which is what happens when you do a fasciotomy. Basically, the foot is flopped and you can't pull it up because of the amount of damage and nerves that were severed. I was an executive chef of a country club. I would feed hundreds, if not thousands, of people a day. I had events. I worked my tail off to get to where I was. I sacrificed my 20s. I didn't do anything but work with the hope of securing my future in my 30s. But that almost never happened.
Trash. Can I help you with trash?
Yes, please. The surgeon that caused my injuries is still practicing and has been practicing for the almost 2 years since this happened. Even if the case was to settle, I'm going to always owe more than I'm ever going to potentially receive. And this is all because of the cap on the pain and suffering that leaves victims with nothing to try and figure out the rest of their life and try and figure out how to move on from something that they did not cause but now have to live with for the rest of their life. It took 28 years to build who I was. And in one room, in 1 minute, in one flick of the wrist, she took that all away from me. And it could have been avoided. Why did she not make that 4-inch incision? Why did she not stop after the first puncture?
I can't believe that a doctor that was that negligent continues to practice. I understand doctors, surgeons, and even nurses make mistakes, but this one punctured her aorta 3 times before stopping to address the bleeding. And what's even more terrifying is that my friend can't even share what hospital or doctor did this because of a gag clause agreement that she was forced to sign during the settlement, which she was forced into because of this MICRA cap. What the hell is MICRA anyway? This all sounds like a nightmare to me. How can this injustice exist in 2019 and America of all places? I had to learn more. Was her case a unique situation, or is medical negligence common? So I started doing some research and learned that medical errors are the 3rd leading cause of death in the United States. How did I not know about this? Was I the only one kept in the dark? Do you guys know what the top 3 causes of death are in the United States?
Cardiovascular disease.
My guess is going to be heart problems and then cancer.
That it's probably like cigarettes and tobacco, drunk driving.
It would be related to heart disease, heart attack, stroke, and related things.
Cancer, car wrecks. Cancer, and
probably alcohol, cancer, and car accidents.
Heart failure, car accidents, and cancer.
So actually the first one is heart disease.
Okay.
Second one is cancer.
Okay.
Third one is medical negligence.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Are you surprised?
Medical negligence, I am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
wow, that's insane. That's scary.
Turns out I'm not the only one. I continued to research about this subject and about MICRA, and I knew that I needed to learn more and hear more stories. I came across this Facebook page for victims of medical error where I connected with Wade Ayer.
Hi Wade, this is Angela. I was wondering if I'd be able to fly out there and hear more about your story.
Well, I am guaranteeing you there are a lot of people, family members, and victims that would love to have their stories heard.
And that was the moment I fell into this rabbit hole and started my journey. So I flew out to Wisconsin to meet Wade.
After his sister Julie died unexpectedly in 2003, Wade Ayer decided something had to change.
There's a sense of loss in the system.
38-year-old Julie Ayer went in for a breast augmentation surgery in Florida. Records show she flatlined, and doctors waited several minutes before starting chest compressions. She was flown back to Wisconsin, where she died 3 months later.
I can tell you one thing is that Julie could command a room. She was livelier than anything out there in the world. To be honest, all the boys wanted to be around her. I was popular by osmosis because everyone wanted to be around me, to be around Julie.
She had magnetism, as he was mentioned there. Boys and girls wanted to hang out with her.
Julie, September 25th, went into cosmetic surgery, and we learned that she overdosed on propofol sometime later, but we found out that the doctor had no licensing expertise to administer level 3 anesthesia. So there was a nurse that was kind of on the case, and she was very attentive, and I'm walking down the hallway, and I was pulled into a janitor closet. Took a pen, wrote down propofol and Demerol, circled it. She looked at me and she said, "You didn't hear this from me because I will lose my job, but start here. You better get yourself an attorney. Their charts are off. They can't explain who gave what, when, where, why, how, and how much. You need to get yourself an attorney right now."
January 3, we go open the mail, and this card was addressed to Julie. In writing it says, "Seek and ye shall find. I know what happened that day, September 25th. And it's not signed. It just happened that about the same time that we received this card, the guy who wrote the thing, he went to ABC in Tampa and told them about what happened in the surgery.
38-year-old Julie Rubenzer is in surgery getting her breasts enlarged under what an expert later called a dazzling array of anesthetic agents.
As soon as we laid her down, all of her vital signs, she just crashed on the table.
She went into cardiac arrest.
Correct. He stood there and threw a tantrum at first.
Threw a tantrum?
Threw a tantrum. He just stood there and he said, "I don't need this today." I said to him, "Doctor, she is flatlined. She needs chest compressions." He said, "No, don't give chest compressions."
Why not?
He was afraid it would mess up his surgery.
I said, "Julie, when you wake up, you are in trouble." The second week, I said, "Just wake up. I won't be mad. Just wake up." And by the third week, truthfully, I didn't want her to.
Julie Rubenzer never woke up. Her parents took her home to Wisconsin, where she died 3 months after surgery.
And he was a surgical tech on the surgery. And I asked him, "Listen, what happened in there anyway?" He said, "Well, they started the surgery and the doctor ordered the anesthesia. They get into the surgery at a certain point. The nurse yells that, 'Hey, she's flatlined on the heart monitor. She's not breathing. We got to do CPR now.' The doctor says, quote, 'Not yet.' And that do not resuscitate order stood for 5 minutes. And I tell you, when I heard that, I could have thrown up. I was so goddamn upset. We had to live with this thing for a year until they had a licensing hearing in Florida. A year later, they had a licensing in Florida, and then had these people stand up and sworn testimony, and they verified how much anesthesia she got. And it turned out to be 1,650 milligrams of propofol. Now, I didn't know how that counted, so I talked to an anesthesiologist, and I said, "How much should that body have gotten?" He said, "Probably somewhere around 150 to 200 milligrams, somewhere in there." I'll never forget, I went over, and I took her hand, and I said, "Julie, squeeze my hand." And there was nothing there, nothing. But I remember I was out in that hallway just crying my guts out, just complete meltdown. That day, she and I went to Julie's room, and we got to tell her that we're going to let her die. And that's, I don't remember what words I used, but I remember she said, we want to have you a lot more than 38 years. So we're talking over her body and we're saying goodbye to her. We made statements that we don't know what happened to Julie. We didn't know. But I remember I made a statement that that her life was no ordinary life. It was a distinctive life. And her death was no ordinary death. It was some type of a wrongful death, and we're going to do something about it.
Now, more than a decade later, Ayer has made it his mission to get justice for his sister. He wants to increase transparency in operating rooms. He teamed up with Representative Christine Sidnicki to create Julie's Law. It would allow patients to request audio and visual recordings of what goes on in operating rooms.
The black box bill is a bill that would mandate at the patient's request that their surgical procedures be audio and video recorded. And I want to make real clear, it's not about recording the actual surgery. It's about recording what's going on around the room, who's coming and going, at what time, are the proper people in the room, was there an anesthesiologist in the room when they were supposed to be or not, was the heart specialist in the room or not. This is what we have found when doing some research. We found that this is probably the most common problem. This bill is not necessarily completely about malpractice. That's how it started out. But as we started digging more into putting this bill together, we discovered that it could be used in a number of different ways. Malpractice. It could be used to prove that the doctor did not make any mistakes. I mean, there's so many. It could clear anybody's name in this. This makes a lot of sense. This is the future of medical records. Everything now is digital. Everything's now electronic. Why wouldn't our medical records be handled the same way? What we want is transparency, and for these families to understand what happened in the room. It's as simple as that.
A few years ago, I wrote an article in the Journal of the American Medical Association suggesting that we can use video technology for quality improvement and safety. It's also helpful, to be honest with you as a surgeon, to have the last operation a patient of mine had available to me before I go in there and plan the next operation. Video has tremendous power in healthcare, and it has tremendous power for coaching and improving as surgeons.
Videos would be very, very helpful, not only for demonstrating errors, but actually preventing errors from ever happening, because if they made a little mistake and they could catch those and improve those and eliminate those, then there would never be an injury to patients. In 1995, I underwent an Achilles tendon repair. So I went back and I got the operative report. And it turned out an average Achilles tendon repair should take 15 minutes. The operative report indicated that my procedure had taken 2.5 hours. And I also learned that they put a tourniquet above my knee at high pressure, blocking all circulation for 2.5 hours. In retrospect, what had happened, because of either the tourniquet or the procedure itself, two out of the 3 arteries that supplied my leg were destroyed. And that's how I lost my leg. So it was a surgical error is the reason that I lost my leg. I would love to see the video of that surgery. Boy, would I love to see what went on there. Why didn't the anesthesia? I can tell you that I know from reading about tourniquets that the maximum time you're supposed to leave them on is 1 hour, and an alarm is supposed to go off. So what happened to the alarm? Why didn't the anesthesia stop the tourniquet? What was going on between the orthopedic surgeon and the anesthesiologist? Why didn't, if that surgeon was having a problem, why didn't he call for help? It shouldn't have taken 2.5 hours to repair my Achilles tendon. He should have asked for help, and he did not.
And clearly, it's not in the hospital's best interest to have cameras in the operating room, because then there's evidence there showing that the surgeons made mistakes. Because if a surgeon was negligent, then we would have the evidence to prove that and move forward with a medical malpractice case. And so why would they want us to have that footage? It could be used to clear their name. It could be used to prevent medical harm. We have a right to this information. We have a right to see what's happened to us in that operating room or to our loved ones. I went back to do some more investigating, and I came across this article with Wade and Ms. Sidnicki about the cameras in the operating room and learned about Dr. John James and his research. So I connected with Dr. James and flew out to Texas to meet him.
Dr. John James is the founder of Patient Safety America. In September 2013, Dr. James published an article published in the Journal of Patient Safety, which found that somewhere between 210 and 440,000 Americans die each year from preventable medical harm in the hospital. Dr. James retired in early 2014 as NASA's chief toxicologist. He received his PhD in pathology from the University of Maryland. Dr. James, thanks very much for being with us.
Emma, you can do it. Get that swing going. The thing I'm proudest of in all this is a publication in 2013 in the Journal of Patient Safety. I saw data sort of out there that no one was using. There was really, and I'll say it's 3.5 studies because one was a pilot study, that's a half study, and there were 3 really good studies on what is called adverse events and the preventability of those, which is equivalent to a medical error. And those studies were remarkably consistent. And I rolled those together and I made an estimate of the number of medical errors or preventable adverse events that happen in hospitals. That core estimate was 210,000 a year. And that included infections, which a lot of people don't. But healthcare acquired infections are pretty common.
Recent figures suggest that there are about close to 650,000 infections acquired in hospitals, and about 75,000 people in that group die as a consequence of infections. It is really startling. And of course, that is a highly preventable group of disasters.
Well, I was chief of infectious diseases for 20 years at the University of Florida, and we actually had to manage many of the patients who developed those hospital-acquired infections. The leading ones are first surgical associated infections, post-operative infections. The other big group is respiratory infections in patients who have been intubated. 2 other very common ones are central line infections, urinary catheters. Not to mention that some get bone infections or chronic infections that they cannot get rid of, and they require continued surgical debridement. And a number of patients have suffered amputations as a consequence of infections that could not be cured in the bone.
Yeah, that's what almost happened to my friend. They almost had to amputate her. But they were able to get in there and save her leg, even though she's paralyzed. But it all seems so surreal. 650,000 infections acquired from the hospitals? Really? You go into a hospital to be cured and help, not get worse. It makes me never want to step foot inside a hospital again. I had gathered so much information and data that I began to feel overwhelmed.
My name is Michelle Montserrat Ramos. I'm from Los Angeles, California, and I'm here today to talk about my late fiance, Lloyd Montserrat. He was a born leader. From the time he was a child, he ran for student body president of his elementary school, All Souls School in Alhambra, and he won. We met at UCLA at an event. I was in my senior year at UC Irvine, and at the time we met, we discovered we'd been to a lot of the same events, never met each other. We just, from day one, that was it. We just knew from day one. Lloyd went into surgery. He went in for bariatric surgery. And when they decided to do the bariatric surgery, they also decided to take his gallbladder. Before Lloyd entered the hospital, I checked Lloyd's doctor's profile on the medical board website. When I checked the medical board website, Lloyd's doctor's profile was clean. It gave me a false sense of security that I had done the right thing. In fact, Lloyd's doctor's background was far from clean. When Lloyd went into surgery, I took him to the hospital that morning, and that first day, actually, he was in recovery. His surgeon came out, and his surgeon told me that the surgery was a success, and that Lloyd was very strong, and he would be there until Friday. And I believed him. The next morning, I received a call, and I walked into ICU, and the same doctor that had told me the night before that Lloyd was exactly where he should be, walked right into my path and stopped me and said, "Why don't we talk over here?" And he looked at me and he said, "We did everything we could, but we couldn't save him." I just looked at him and I thought, okay, my mind, I heard him, but my mind didn't grasp it. When you're in a situation like that, you don't know, what do you do? I made a phone call. I hired a pathologist to have a private autopsy done. And when they went in and through the autopsies and everything, it was determined that during surgery, the surgeon nicked his bowel, and the contents of his bowel went into the stomach cavity, and infection was not treated. He ultimately died from sepsis. But, every day I woke up to a new day without Lloyd, and I thought, who else is going to die today? Who else is going to be harmed today?
1 in 25 patients is the victim of an error. And, that includes the whole array. A small error that may have had a minor impact on the patient to death and permanent disability. So, and you need to look at that whole range. I get frustrated sometimes when people only count deaths, because people who survive often a life of disability from the error.
On August 1st, 2012, I went into the hospital to have surgery that day. It was a Wednesday. I was planning to get out the next day on Thursday. After the hysterectomy, the doctor had indicated that everything went well during surgery and I should be waking up shortly. After I woke up and as the hours went on, I started to get a lot of pain. I wasn't quite sure what was happening, and I was complaining about the pain. So they decided to keep me another night.
And the doctor took me outside in the hallway while they were working on the net and said, we've got to take her in because we found out that we cut her colon during the operation and she's very critical.
And so Rolando, not knowing and me thinking the same thing, well, just fix it, right? You cut it, just fix it. And so he says, no, she's critical. We're gonna have to put her in the ICU. Basically, within 40 hours and a cut colon, and finding out through our lawsuit later that the doctor had ordered an enema. And so with an open colon and an enema, I contracted sepsis immediately. For 4 months, I was in a medically induced coma.
I do remember one thing. While she was in the burn unit, she was medically induced coma, and we tried to tell her that we had amputated her legs and arms, and I knew the doctors were trying to tell her, and I knew that she didn't know. She had no idea what was going on. But I did do something because I was there every day, and the kids would come on the weekends, around their activities and so forth. And one day while she was just laying in bed, I thought I would try something just to see if she felt I was there. So I got as close as I could to her face and got closer and closer to her. So when I got so close that I kissed her on her lips, and she kissed me back. So she knew I was there.
The infection was so intense. I was not only a sepsis victim, but I became a burn victim because the sepsis burnt my skin from the inside out. So 50% of my skin was burnt, and they had to use the other 50% for grafting, which wasn't even enough. They also used cadaver skin, pig skin, and whatever they could find to graft my body. So I was in the burn unit at Torrance Memorial for approximately 9 months. Debriding, skin grafting. We don't even know how many surgeries I had, to be quite honest with you. Countless. So after I got out of the burn unit, they decided it was time for me to get some physical therapy. Having that, and then trying to work with prosthetics or doing anything, my skin grafts would start to rip. And so basically, while I was at Long Beach Memorial, they had to move me from physical therapy into the wound unit and do more skin grafting and more cleaning the wounds. So I ultimately ended up at Long Beach Memorial for a year. So in total, I was in hospital care for 2 years.
It could be worse though, right? Could be worse.
It just breaks my heart to hear all these stories. People losing their limbs, their loved ones, all from things that could have been avoided. It makes me sad, but also angry. And that anger fueled me to keep going. Are hospital-acquired infections the main form of medical error? After doing some research, I learned that medication errors are just as common.
About 15 years ago, there was a report that catalyzed the patient safety movement in the United States by the Institute of Medicine called To Err is Human. In that report, they found that medication errors were the most common safety problem in the United States in inpatients. Well, 15 years later, in a series of new reports from the Institute of Medicine, the same problem has been observed.
1 out of 4 to 1 out of 5 times you will have a medication error in the hospital.
Medication errors are serious, common, and really problematic. Not only is there the issue of wrong dose, but someone gets the decimal point wrong and they get 10,000 times the dose that they should have gotten because the decimal was in the wrong place. But the wrong dose, wrong medication, wrong patient getting the wrong medication, the formulation of the medication in the pharmacy, in the hospital, being cockeyed and completely wrong. When one speaks to anyone about this unbelievable carnage, no one wants to believe this.
Emily was born in 2004, and she's my third child. And just a beautiful, beautiful little girl. She was always giggling, always happy. She didn't fuss much like normal children do. Emily would walk in and immediately light up the room, have everybody laughing and being not so serious. My wife and I used to say she was very much an old soul. Are you having fun, Emily? Huh? You having fun, sweetie pie? Fall of 2005, my daughter Emily was diagnosed with having a grapefruit-sized mass in her abdomen. They did recommend the course of treatment as being 3-day rounds of chemotherapy, which was actually a topicide that was used. Everything went really well with her treatment on Friday, February 24th. Everything went well on Saturday, February 25th. And on February 26th, the day I was supposed to take my baby girl home cured, I walked into the treatment room and my wife was holding Emily unconscious in her arms. I said, "What's going on? What happened?" And I just remember this look of fear in my wife's eyes as she's holding Emily. And she shook her head and said, I don't know. Once we got her down to the PICU, everyone was scurrying around, all the clinicians were, trying to stabilize Emily and also figure out what had happened, what caused her condition to decline so quickly and deteriorate. And it was at that time I was thinking to myself, there was nothing I could do, but I was trying to think what happened. What they found out was that one of their pharmacy technicians had made a horrible IV compounding error. Instead of using a standard off-the-shelf bag of saline, which has 0.9% sodium chloride, this young pharmacy technician saw 3 vials of what's called hypertonic saline, which has 23.4% concentration of sodium chloride, and she saw an empty compounding bag, And this young pharmacy technician decided to manually withdraw the contents of those 3 vials of hypertonic saline and put those into this compounding bag and use that as the base solution for Emily's IV preparation that day. And when someone is overdosed on, of all things, sodium chloride or salt, that causes immediate cerebral edema or brain swelling. And unfortunately, when that happened with my daughter, immediately she was put on life support. And after multiple EEGs that showed little to no brain activity, after 3 days, my wife and I had to make the worst decision of our lives, one I would hope that no parent would ever have to make for their child, which was to take Emily off of life support.
You know, 10 years ago, we physicians prescribed 2.4 billion prescriptions. Last year, it hit 4.6 billion. Now, did disease double in the last 10 years? No. We have a crisis of appropriateness in medicine. That's the real bottom line issue when it comes to the fundamental driver of medical quality and safety. Now, we sometimes prescribe medications at the wrong dose, at the wrong frequency, or simply prescribe medications that patients shouldn't be taken because they could be on a treatment alternative. We've seen that with the opioid epidemic. I myself, with good intentions, prescribed opioids to thousands of patients that never needed them. And I'm being very honest about this because I think we need an honest conversation. I had bad science and good intentions, and I was told, give opioids out liberally because patients are frequently undertreated with pain after surgery at the time of discharge, and they're not addictive. Well, guess what? That was really bad information. And when we manage somebody's pain in the hospital, when they go home, that prescription should be tailored to the patient. There are a lot of things that we can do to reduce the amount of prescribing that we're doing.
Tim Smick says it's a nightmare that never ends. It began when his son Alex fractured his back in a skateboard accident, and a pain doctor prescribed powerful medications. They say Alex wanted to get off of the pain meds, so they checked him into a hospital.
He was such a fun kid. He had a wonderful personality, lots of friends. He was very outgoing, athletic. He played basketball and football, hockey, baseball. He rode motorcycles, and then he was on the golf team in high school. So he's very athletic. He was so kind and compassionate, and he loved people, and he would do anything, go out of his way to help people.
Well, and he was studying to be a nurse and wanted to be in that industry. He was my partner in crime. We'd ride motorcycles and hunt and fish and outdoor stuff. He was so much fun. So he was my buddy. And then he got into playing his guitar and got me into it. And he was like my instructor, and we had great times. We were working on songs when he passed, and I can't pick up the guitar anymore. It just tears me up. But I miss him a lot.
He had injured his back in a skateboarding accident just around the corner here. It was a pretty bad accident where the paramedics had to take him to the hospital. And his doctor was treating him and then sent him to a pain management doctor in Long Beach. And the pain management doctor started him on Vicodin and eventually started giving him OxyContin. And about 10 days before Alex passed, the doctor gave him morphine. This doctor he kept prescribing the opioids. And the day that he gave Alex the morphine, he overdosed on the morphine realized what had happened, it was an accidental overdose. We had no idea that he had become so dependent. We were a little naive about the opioid dependency, but after he had the overdose, we decided together as a family that the best thing for him to do would be to go into the hospital and safely detox. And I will never forget it. It was February 22nd, 2012, and he was admitted. I got a phone call the next morning at 7:31 that said there was an emergency at the hospital with Alex, and we needed to hurry to the hospital. And I got to the hospital and they walked me into a room, and I sat down. My brother was with me, and the doctor walked in and he sat down and said, "I'm sorry, Alex passed away." It was just so shocking. I just started screaming. I couldn't believe it. I asked the doctor what happened. Like, once I stopped screaming and could gain my composure, I asked him what happened. Why did he die? And he said, "I don't know." And he just kept shaking his head. "I don't know." We later found out why he died. The coroner did come to the hospital, and we had our own private investigation. Alex had been overdosed to death in the hospital. They, within 2 hours of him arriving at the hospital, they started him on a regimen of medications. He was showing no symptoms of withdrawing from the opioids. And they gave him, over a period of a few hours, 11 different medications, multiple doses of some of them. Many of them were central nervous system suppressants. Some of the medications were contraindicated. They shouldn't have been given together. And the doctor wrote an order to only check Alex's vitals while awake. So at 11 p.m., they gave him his last dose of medication and closed the door. Nobody checked on him for over 7 hours. So he was in that bed, face down, fighting for his life. And he had been dead when they found him for many hours, because we later found out that he was in rigor mortis in the hospital bed. They left him so long. When we were at the hospital, then they showed us to the room to see him. He was on his back, and his arms were above his head, and his skin was purple. And I said, "Why does he look like that?" And the nurse said, "Because he had died on his stomach, and the blood had pooled."
He had vomit in his eyes, which meant that he was fighting for his life. He was in full rigor mortis. We had figured out that he had died at about 11:30 or 12 the night before. And reading the charts that they wrote in on his records every 2 hours, they were dosing him up. And his blood pressure was dropping, his heart rate was dropping. And they didn't realize what they were writing down. He was crashing, and they documented it. And then just left him alone. And
it's shocking.
Thank you for sharing.
Feels like it was yesterday.
Could you talk a little bit about physician burnout? That obviously attributes to human error, to making mistakes when they're working so many hours.
I believe Doctors are not lazy people. We just don't want to spend our time on things that don't matter. And when you've got record rates of burnout in healthcare, we've got to just stop and ask, what are we doing? I mean, patients falling through the cracks, us seeing treatment options that we cannot recommend or deliver to our patients, people with fragmented networks, people unable to access good care, people working in systems that we know are dangerous, but we have no other choice. There are so many things we can do better at in healthcare. Doctors are getting crushed right now. They are getting crushed by regulatory requirements, increasing overhead, more paperwork, a business-style corporate throughput model. Look, doctors are sick of the throughput, billing, volume model of healthcare. They want to spend time with people. We don't want to be on the treadmill. We don't want to be simply evaluated by how much we did. We want to be evaluated by the quality of what we did.
When someone is burning out, their likelihood of producing errors, preventable errors, is much higher because they're distracted. They're not focused. Patients are at risk when a physician or a nurse is depressed or is suffering burnout. One of the leading causes of burnout is a loss of sense of control. The systems are so unreliable and they are not predictable. So a doctor comes in or a nurse comes in, they never know what's going to happen that day because the systems are all out of whack. They're always trying to work around difficulties and obstructions. So that gives them a sense that the system is out of control and they cannot control it. The other thing that's happened is our health systems are so big now and they're very impersonal. And the front line is not being heard. Decisions are being made up in boardrooms. The boardroom has no idea what's really going on in the front lines. So they are making decisions that impact those on the front line and they are not working.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, I'm alright, back in the hospital. How are you?
What happened?
Just been battling infection this month. Been here basically half the month, on and off. First it was abdominal, now it's my leg. It's basically cellulitis, and it's requiring intense antibiotics, like triple antibiotics, which are so strong that all my veins that they're putting them through are collapsing. So it's like burning from the inside out pretty much. So just gotta keep going, right?
Keep going. Hopefully soon this will be all behind you, you know?
Sure.
And I'll be sending positive vibes.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Eric Andrist. I live in Valley Village, California. In 2002, I gave up my career to care for my disabled sister, Callie. She was mentally retarded. She had the learning ability of a 4-year-old.
And then in 2012, she came down with a terrible stomach ache. So I took her to the ER. And this is where it gets hard to tell. She laid in the ER for 15 hours, writhing in pain, and they didn't give her any pain medication. She was screaming and hollering and just in such terrible pain. They never actually diagnosed that what she actually had was a strangulated bowel that had burst and was sending toxins into her abdomen, causing sepsis. She should have been sent to the ICU for immediate surgery. In the meantime, they sent her for a CT scan, a second CT scan that was actually unnecessary. And in order to do that, they gave her a radioactive beverage to drink so that it shows up on the CT scan. But shortly before they gave her that, they finally gave her some pain medication. And they gave her a drug called Dilaudid, which is 7 times stronger than morphine, which knocked her out. But because of the sedative effect of the pain medication, she ended up aspirating that radioactive beverage into her lungs, which caused pulmonary edema and sent her into cardiac arrest. The hospital was under the wrong impression that she was a DNR, a do not resuscitate. Why they thought that, we don't know, because it's in her records that she wasn't, and I was standing right there telling them that she wasn't. But because they thought she was a DNR, and she was laying there in cardiac arrest, they stood around doing nothing. They didn't even try to revive her. When they realized that they were wrong, they called a code blue, and they were finally able to revive her 17 minutes later, but it was too late. She was already brain dead, and she died the next day.
Wow.
It was pretty horrific.
We did big Halloween and Christmas displays in our yard for our neighborhood, and it made her so happy. I'm sitting here and going, what am I gonna do this Halloween and Christmas? I don't know. I don't think I can do it, because so much of what we did in our lives were for Callie, and she brought us such joy.
I had never even heard of the MICRA law until probably 2012. And I found out that it's this law that was passed in 1975 that limits the pain and suffering damages on lawsuits that victims of medical errors bring in court. And it caps the amount at $250,000. So we try to tell people about this law because it's a slap in the face when you finally hear about it at the wrong time. Usually in a medical malpractice case, there's two different ways that they get paid. One is economic damages. So if you have worked all your life and you have an income and you're going to lose out money from missing work in the future because of the injury, that's economic damages. That can be covered in the lawsuit and paid for. There's no cap on that. The other portion is non-economic damages. That's the pain and suffering damages. That's what's capped. So not everybody is limited to just the non-economic damages. My sister was, because she was mentally challenged. She wasn't married. She had no children. She had a learning disability. She didn't work. So she had no real income. So she didn't qualify in her lawsuit for any of the economic damages. She only qualified for the damages that were capped. So the medical and insurance industry is very, very strong, and it's just an uphill battle. There's actually a nonprofit organization called CAP, whose sole purpose is to protect MICRA. Its sole purpose, it's the only thing it does, is to protect MICRA.
And it's obviously backed by the insurance.
Of course. Yeah.
MICRA is the name of a cruel law passed 44 years ago in California. MICRA caps how much an individual injured person can recover to $250,000 for their pain and suffering, disfigurement, loss of life functions, anything other than medical bills and wage losses. Since 1975, when it was enacted, this cap has never been indexed for inflation. Women, and I mean this is really such a significant point, women are particularly hard hit and discriminated against by that cap because they earn less, are more likely to stay at home with kids. Honestly, I just have to go off script here and say this is the most fucked up law that exists in California. I kid you not. And I would ask Consumer Watchdog not to edit that because it is so fundamentally cruel. It's in your face cruel. It's like I can get by with harming you and there's very few consequences and the pain and suffering of this people are ignored.
This is not an attack on doctors. It's not. In 1975, doctors were protesting saying, pass this law, pass this law. And Jerry Brown said to Tom Girardi, who's in the room, he said, Tom, you know, they're protesting. I'm going to sign this. It's bullshit. It's unconstitutional. The Supreme Court won't uphold it. That was 2 years before I was born.
Two insurance companies, Travels Insurance and Argonaut Insurance Company, they sent out premium notices to their doctors they insured, and they said, we are going to increase your premiums about 350% next year. A few years later, a big group of doctors sued Travelers, contending that the premium increases were totally unjustified. There was no crisis in premiums, and Travelers agreed to refund $50 million in premiums that they had taken from these doctors back to the doctors. But of course, nothing happened with respect to the malpractice caps that were imposed by the Medical Injury Compensation Reform Act, or MICRA, of 1975.
All right, so listen to this. California's Medical Injury Compensation Reform Act was signed into law in 1975 in response to a perceived but later discredited crisis in the rising cost of premiums for medical malpractice insurance. So pretty much it was bullshit. You know, it's so obvious that this is dirty politics and that it's in the interest of the insurance companies and not the patients at all. It's clearly harming the patients. And like Eric talked about, this organization called CAPS, the Coalition to Protect MICRA. It says the purpose of CAP is to protect vulnerable populations. This actually affects the vulnerable populations because the cap for non-economic damages really affects children, the elderly, college students, stay-at-home wives or stay-at-home husbands. Or even protection. MICRA ensures injured patients receive fair compensation while protecting patients' rights and preserving access to the courts. I mean, I think from everyone that we've talked to, it actually hinders them from going to court and from going to trial.
Alex was a college student, so he didn't have income. He didn't have dependents. So our entire case between the hospital and the doctor was capped at $250,000. And the cost of going to trial, it can be as much as $100,000. So it doesn't make sense to even go to trial. And so Alex was denied justice. Our family was denied justice for Alex because of that MICRA cap.
But what it does is the attorneys won't take the case because there isn't any money in it at all for them.
And it costs them a lot of it. Actually, they have to spend a lot of their own money just to go to take the case, and there's no money at the end. There's no money, so it's just so wrong.
And MICRA pretty much protects the insurance companies from having to spend their own money, right? Is that why they're fighting so hard not to raise the cap?
Yeah. Yes, because when you think about it, in a case like ours, where the negligence was so severe, where they drugged Alex to death, and we couldn't even get to trial. So the insurance companies, it cost them very little. We ended up settling out of court because we had to. We wanted so much information, and going to court would have helped us. In the settlement agreement, they wanted us to have a gag clause. They did not want us to be able to say the doctor's name or the name of the hospital, and we refused. We would have taken no money at all because, again, for us, it wasn't about the money, it was about change. It was about getting justice for Alex and about enacting change so that it didn't happen to somebody else. So we refused to sign it. Most people don't even think about looking up a doctor on the medical board website, but as an informed consumer, if you knew how to do that and you looked up this particular doctor who killed our son, it looks like he didn't do much more than a minor paper violation. The hospital actually did sever ties with the doctor after our case was complete. And then he went on and opened his own medical center and he has rehabilitation centers in Orange County. And he continues treating patients to this day. And that's frightening for us because we know what he did to Alex.
So going through this coalition's website, this CAP website, the first thing I see is this quote from Assemblyman Barry Keene. Now, he is the author of MICRA, and it quotes why he created this bill in the first place. Well, obviously because of the escalating medical costs and crisis, which we now know is bullshit. Well, we actually have a quote from him. Eric Andrews had emailed him about his concerns about the non-economic damage cap, and he responded. And this is his response. His intention of the non-economic damage cap was to adjust with inflation, but somehow that got thrown out. He also states that he believes the cap does hinder people's rights to go to court, and as the years go on and the cap does not inflate, it's going to make it more difficult for people to go to court. And what pisses me off about this coalition is that it claims this non-economic damage cap doesn't hinder people from going to court or going to trial, which we know it does. And it's also their job to keep MICRA the way it is. They don't want to adjust the cap because they fear it's going to increase insurance premiums, which we know is bullshit because that's the insurance commissioner's job to address those rates.
My point is simply this. These MICRA caps, as they're called, which the opponents to the initiative argue are necessary to keep rates down, haven't actually worked to keep rates down. What helps keep rates down is rate regulation, which is an authority I have and have used successfully on behalf of medical providers to try to reject excessive rates.
So medical malpractice has been used by insurance companies as a revenue generation?
Oh, there's no question that the medical malpractice insurers were making more money than they should. And what's really interesting is several of these companies, which are dominant in the market, are owned and operated by doctors themselves. And so doctors are charging other doctors excessive rates. I thought it was outrageous, and that's why I intervened, ordered those companies in. We adjusted their rates. We've saved doctors $52 million. So all of this argument about the necessity of these non-economic damage caps or MICRA to keep rates down misses the fact that excessive rates have been charged even with MICRA. And I think the best way to address that is through robust rate regulation.
This isn't only an issue in California. There are approximately 29 other states with some sort of cap. Clearly, there are a lot of factors playing here, and you should do your own research within your own state on what your laws are. But a cap created in 1975 that hasn't accrued to inflation is clearly just wrong.
And each lawyer said you definitely have a case, but I don't know if you know of the MICRA law, but because of the MICRA law, I'm sorry, but it would be a bad business decision to take this case. Eventually, did find a lawyer who did take the case, and during the legal process, the doctor admitted to not documenting his pain level. Doctor admitted to changing his medical records, and because of where Lloyd was in terms of hospitals, we were forced into arbitration. So we went into arbitration, so nothing was public. So that occurred, and I realized going through that process, yes, we learned some things that we didn't know that had occurred in the hospital. But the doctor wasn't disciplined. And like I mentioned, each day that I woke up, I couldn't help but think, who else was going to be harmed that day? And I knew I needed to do something else. So I decided to file a consumer complaint with the medical board. Because as I mentioned earlier, his record was clean. So it had been leaked to me that Lloyd's surgeon may have an arrest record. I went to our local courthouse and put in a public information request and came back with 2 arrests. But it wasn't the arrest that I was told about. So ended up hiring a private investigator, came up with multiple arrests. One of those arrests was for felony possession of crack cocaine, and the other arrests were for prostitution. So, like I mentioned, I decided that I was going to file a consumer complaint. So now I had records that had been changed. I had 2 autopsy reports from the LA County Coroner's Office. I had arrest records. I had names from other victims of the surgeon. I had all this information, and you would think that it was enough to at least go to investigation. But the doctor wasn't disciplined. And like I mentioned, each day that I woke up, I couldn't help but think, who else was going to be harmed that day?
It's so scary that all these doctors are still practicing, and we don't know their names, we don't know what hospital, we don't know who they are. It could be my doctor, your doctor, and that's so scary.
When I was interviewing lawyers, attorneys for our case, I interviewed 4 or 5 with a friend of ours that's an attorney. The biggest thing that came up was the caps.
I got the $250,000. How far does that go? For a new van to transport me, $80,000 for a van. Having care, all the different things that have come about in the hospital, loss of our jobs. How far does that go? When I don't have my prosthetic on, my arm prosthetic, and this is a joystick, and if we were ever able to get the car transformed into something that I could drive, it would probably be a system similar to this, because I can't anticipate driving with this prosthetic, because what happens is I tend to sweat a lot and the prosthetic slips, so that would not be safe driving. Basically, we just had to say that we cannot disclose the amount of the settlement. We did not go to court because we felt it was going to be cost prohibitive. We also can't disclose the name of the hospital, nor the name of the doctor.
But there were a lot of things that were going on outside of the hospital. I lost my job. I couldn't work. The kids kept going to school. And then we had things that I never had experience with. Social Security, disability, unemployment. And then just the bills started coming in. And when Annette was awake and alert, I think one of the things that helped us get through this was our sense of humor. And one day the bills were coming in, and I came into Annette's room, and I said, "You know how much this is costing us? And we know each other, right?" She knew what I was going to say. I said, "It's costing an arm and a leg." And she came back at me and said, "No, it's costing 2 arms and 2 legs."
It may feel like this is all doom and gloom, but I want to remind you that doctors, nurses, and surgeons save thousands of lives every day. And there are things we can do to help prevent medical error. Also, in the last few years, we've seen a lot of improvement in patient safety.
The good news is that there has been progress made in recent years, and we're going to hear from our panelists about the kinds of progress that has been made, and more importantly, where we have to go.
I have a great deal of hope, even despite what happened, and all of you should as well. I really believe we can get to 0 preventable medication errors. I started thinking about what happened with my daughter, and I started thinking, where did the systems, processes, and protocols break down that horrible day that set these amazing clinicians up to fail my baby girl? But I still believe to this day, had that medical facility had barcode verification, just very basic, and that pharmacy tech scanned that first vial of hypertonic saline, all kinds of bells and whistles would have gone off, alerting her supervising pharmacist that, hey, something's going on here. And I believe Emily'd still be with us today.
What we have done, and I think many hospitals, and I think all hospitals should do, is have a barcoding system where you verify by barcode. This dramatically reduces the errors and dramatically reduces the likelihood of a death as a consequence of medication errors. If a hospital doesn't have a barcode system, you know that you are at increased risk of a medication error. If you had a choice between a hospital that had barcode readers and one that didn't, I would recommend you go to the hospital with barcode readers.
It's all of these catastrophes that have moved me to write this latest book. But people don't really want to hear about it, is the problem. They want to believe in their doctors. And for the most part, they should, because the vast majority of doctors are good doctors, competent and caring. I've often said that anyone who goes to hospital better take an advocate who's sitting right there if possible, and obviously they can't be there all the time, but as long as possible, and say, what are you giving my friend or my child, and what is the dose, and is it correct? And you'll be surprised how often this is an issue.
The key way of preventing spread of hospital-acquired pathogens that are highly resistant is hand washing. And we use an alcohol solution that kills virtually all bacteria on the hands. The key is you need to gel in when you walk into the patient's room, and then when you leave the patient's room, you need to gel out. Now, it's very difficult for the human brain to always remember to gel in and gel out. And so we actually have in our hospital a small computer that's placed in the lapel called BioVigil that actually senses alcohol. So when you gel, once you gel your hand, you place your hand over this sensor, and it senses alcohol, and as you walk through the door, there's a sensor. If it senses the alcohol, then the little hand on the lapel turns green, and the patient can see that you wash your hands. When you come out, you do the same procedure. If you forget, you have 30 seconds actually, and if you forget, it first turns yellow and then it turns red, and it makes a little beep. And you get very upset if you get a yellow or red. So at the end of the day, each of the nurses and doctors puts their little lapel computer into a slot to be recharged, and all of the hand washings for the day and how many were successfully performed when they walked through the door is actually counted and is sent to a central data bank. And then each individual receives an email once per week as to the percentage adherence they have. What we found is, before we started this, we had a 60% adherence rate to hand washing. After it was fully instituted, we moved up to 96% adherence rate.
From the patient's perspective, it's you need a level of awareness, first of all, to understand these infections are preventable, and you have to be aware of what's going on in your care, whether it be in a hospital or a surgical center or whatever, and ask questions of healthcare providers. I always tell people, if they're having surgery, one of the main questions is to ask the surgeon, what are you going to do to be sure I do not get an infection? That's a proactive kind of question. If they say, oh, don't worry about it, we don't have any infections, that's the wrong answer. Because you want to hear them say, well, we do these things to make sure you don't get an infection.
Medical error, or as I like to refer to it, medical care gone wrong, is a major problem in American medicine, but we don't want to create hysteria. The vast majority of doctors do the right thing and always try to. And there are teams of nurses and other clinicians, administrative support in America's medical centers that want you to do well. Here's what you can do to help them. Educate yourself about treatment alternatives. Ask whether or not the procedure needs to be done emergently or if it's worth trying non-surgical or other treatment alternatives in the meantime. Go on PubMed.gov and see if there's some new research in the field. Google the condition. We found Google to be extremely accurate in one study that we did for educating patients with accurate medical background materials for their conversations with physicians. We like informed patients. And keep good records. It's good to keep both a file and an electronic backup version of your medical care. When seeing a specialist, you may want to present them with a summary of all your care to date with the highlighted items so they can quickly connect with your individual situation. And finally, think about being involved in some patient advocacy efforts. We need work both on the national and state, local legislative frontiers, as well as in the patient education communities. Everybody needs to do their part. And I think if there's one thing that I would encourage every physician and every patient in America to think about, it would be the appropriateness of care and the option of treatment alternatives.
When I met up with my friend, I had no idea that it would have led me on this journey. I have learned so much and have met such inspiring people. If I could leave you with a thought, it would be that most doctors are good and caring human beings, and humans make mistakes, and in their profession, one small, simple error can be deadly. So be more cautious when you go to the hospital. Do some research on your doctor. and take someone with you to have your back. There are also some policies that need updating, and we all know how powerful money is in politics. But we are the age of information, transparency, and sharing, and I know that together we can make a difference.
She never stops talking, does she? She's constantly talking.
Well, you know what's really hard for me? Because you still say this about me. I used to talk with my hands. That was my normal, when I would speak or do something at work, and here I am, I'm still trying to talk with my hands.
See that? They might have amputated her arms and legs, but I think God replaced them with wings of inspiration.
I want all of you, everybody sitting in this audience, to know that I've always considered Emily's all of your guardian angel as well. She truly is. And so many good things are coming from this. When Emily first died, I was looking up, saying, really, you just cured her, now you're taking her? I didn't understand. 12 years later, I believe Emily's short life here on earth was meant to save tens of thousands of lives.
When the phone rang, the song you sang faded to the years. Exit your earthly girl, enter a brand new world, 1,000,000 miles from here. This time is left behind, another life to find. Bury the old fears. Oh, love is a ring, media gang, profit off the tears. So won't you